Moscow, January 2008. The Arbat Hotel. Russian Spetsnaz units surround the building. Their target, a 61-year-old man with a heavy build and a penchant for chain smoking. This is Semion Mogilevich. The FBI calls him the boss of bosses of most Russian Mafia syndicates in the world. They want him for $150 million in stock fraud, $10 billion in money laundering, and international arms trafficking. But Mogilevich doesn't look like a mobster. He has a degree in economics. He doesn't use hitmen for every problem. He uses shell companies, gas pipelines, and the global banking system. He dines in Moscow's finest restaurants while his face sits on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He didn't just beat the law, he merged with it. He proved that if you control the energy that heats a continent, you are no longer a criminal. You are a sovereign power. This is the story of the man who turned organized crime into a state-sponsored industry. This is the story of the Brainy Don. Semion Mogilevich was never a street thug. He was an architect of system. Born in Kiev, he graduated from the University of Lviv with a degree in economics. While his peers were learning to pick locks or shake down shopkeepers, Semion was studying how a collapsing superpower fails. He understood a fundamental truth. The greatest fortunes aren't stolen with a gun. They are found in the gap between a system's cost and a person's desperation. Mogilevich viewed the Soviet Union as a decaying machine full of gaps where money could be harvested. He realized that if you control the supply of what people need to survive, you don't need to use violence to control the people. He focused on buying goods at state-controlled prices and selling them at black market rates, currency manipulation, mastering the flow of capital across borders before the law could catch up. This academic foundation earned him the nickname the Brainy Don. He treated organized crime like a corporate conglomerate, viewing violence merely as an unfortunate market correction. By the time the Soviet Union began to crumble, Mogilevich was the only man with the mathematical precision and the lack of a moral compass to turn national chaos into a multi-billion-dollar global empire. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union began allowing a massive wave of Jewish citizens to emigrate to Israel and the United States. However, Soviet law prohibited these families from taking significant assets or hard currency with them. They were forced to leave behind heirlooms, fine art, and life savings. Semion Mogilevich, a Ukrainian Jew himself, didn't see a tragedy. He saw the ultimate market gap. Mogilevich approached these families with a seemingly compassionate offer. He would take their valuables, antique jewelry, paintings, and furniture, sell them at fair market value within the USSR, and then wire the proceeds to them once they were settled in the West. Because he was an educated, respectable businessman from their own community, thousands of desperate families handed him their entire life's work. The promised money never arrived. Once the families crossed the border, they had no legal recourse against a man back in a crumbling communist state. Mogilevich simply liquidated the assets and pocketed the cash. He didn't just steal. He systematically stripped his own people of their last safety net during their most vulnerable moment. By the time the Soviet Union officially collapsed in 1990, Mogilevich had amassed a seed capital of approximately $20 million. While other future oligarchs were fighting over factories, Semion was already liquid. This fortune, built on the betrayal of thousands of families, allowed him to buy his way into the highest levels of the new Russian government and international banking. He proved that his brand of economics had no room for empathy, only profit. By the early 90s, the Soviet Union had vanished, replaced by a wild east of disorganized, violent gangs. While these groups were busy killing each other over street corners, Mogilevich moved to Budapest, Hungary. He chose this city as his headquarters because it was the perfect bridge between the lawless East and the wealthy West. Here, he transformed the Russian Red Mafia from a collection of street thugs into a global criminal federation. Mogilevich didn't want to manage hitmen or street-level drug deals. For him, that was dirty work. Instead, he acted as a high-level service provider, offering various Slavic crime groups a sophisticated corporate menu. The laundromat, professional-grade money laundering through a web of offshore shell companies. The shield, high-level political and legal protection bought through his deep connections. The network, access to international markets and weapons suppliers. He became the brain for the muscle. If a gang in Moscow had $100 million in dirty cash, they went to Mogilevich to make it clean in London or New York. By providing the intellectual infrastructure of crime, he made himself indispensable. He didn't have to fear rival gangs. They all relied on his brain to survive. He had successfully franchised the underworld, turning chaos into a quiet, efficient, and multi-billion-dollar corporate machine. In the mid-90s, Mogilevich proved his economics degree was his most dangerous weapon. He launched YBM Magnex, a company purportedly manufacturing industrial magnets in Newtown, Pennsylvania. By 1996, it was a darling of the Toronto Stock Exchange, valued at nearly $1 billion. It had a prestigious board of directors and glowing audits. It looked like a classic American success story, but it was actually the world's most sophisticated Potemkin village. The factory was little more than a stage set. Mogilevich used his Red Mafia Federation to create a closed loop of fake commerce. He used a network of shell companies in Eastern Europe to send fake invoices and purchase orders to YBM, making it appear that there was a global explosion in demand for magnets. As revenue flooded in, the stock price skyrocketed by over 2,000%. In reality, no magnets were being sold. Mogilevich was simply moving his own dirty money from Budapest to Pennsylvania and back again, cleaning it through the public markets while tricking thousands of legitimate investors into buying the hype. By the time the FBI and Canadian regulators raided the YBM offices in 1998, the Brainy Don had already won. While the stock crashed to zero, wiping out the life savings of everyday investors and teachers' pension funds, Mogilevich had successfully siphoned $150 million into his untraceable offshore accounts. He had used the Western financial system to rob itself, proving that he didn't need to break into a bank when he could simply own the company the bank was investing in. In 1999, a financial earthquake hit Wall Street. Investigators discovered that between 1996 and 1999, a staggering $10 billion had moved through a single desk at the Bank of New York. The trail led directly back to Semion Mogilevich and his Red Mafia Federation. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. It was the largest money laundering operation in history at the time, proving that the Brainy Don had successfully hacked the heart of the Western financial system. Mogilevich didn't just move small-time drug money. He capitalized on the total collapse of the Soviet Union to act as a funnel for the flight of capital. He helped corrupt officials, oligarchs, and criminals strip the wealth of the Russian state, natural resources, tax revenue, and gold, and wash it through Bonny into safe Western haven. The mechanism, using a company called Benex, Mogilevich's associates moved thousands of wire transfers daily, overwhelming the bank's compliance systems with a sheer volume of legitimate-looking business transactions. The scandal proved a terrifying reality. The global banking system was Mogilevich's personal playground. He had turned one of America's oldest and most respected banks into a laundry machine for the Russian underworld. By the time the FBI and the Department of Justice began making arrests, the $10 billion had already been dispersed across the globe. Despite being indicted, Mogilevich remained safe in Moscow, protected by the very political connections he had funded with his washed billions. The Bonny scandal changed international banking laws forever, forcing the creation of the Know Your Customer rules we use today. But for Mogilevich, it was just another successful market correction. He had proven that if you have enough capital, the borders of the civilized world simply cease to exist. In the mid-90s, the Brainy Don moved from financial fraud into the world of existential threats. As the Soviet Union dissolved, its vast arsenal of weapons and nuclear materials became the most dangerous surplus in history. Intelligence agencies, including the CIA and Mossad, began receiving chilling reports. Semion Mogilevich was allegedly acting as the ultimate broker for enriched uranium and stolen Warsaw-packed weaponry. Mogilevich saw nuclear material as just another commodity with a massive gap between its cost and what a rogue state or terror group was desperate enough to pay. He didn't need to be a scientist. He just needed to control the logistics of the shadows. Reports surfaced of him attempting to move red mercury and nuclear components through his established criminal federation routes in Eastern Europe. The threat was so severe that it triggered a fundamental shift in Western law enforcement. The FBI didn't just want to arrest a mobster. They needed to dismantle a shadow empire that threatened global security. They created a special task force dedicated solely to Mogilevich, a level of attention usually reserved for sovereign nation or terrorist organization. Whether Mogilevich successfully moved a dirty bomb or enriched uranium remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in the intelligence community. However, the mere fact that his name appeared in nuclear smuggling dossiers changed his status forever. He was no longer just a white-collar gangster, he was a national security threat. To this day, the files on his nuclear dealings remain largely classified, leaving a haunting question. Exactly how much of the world's most dangerous material passed through the hands of the Brainy Don? In the early 2000s, Mogilevich achieved the ultimate evolution of a criminal. He became a geopolitical necessity. He moved beyond bank fraud and into the very lifeblood of Europe, natural gas. He became the silent partner behind Rosukrenergo, a mysterious middleman company that sat between the Russian state giant Gazprom and Ukraine. Mogilevich understood that in the modern world, the power to kill a man is nothing compared to the power to freeze a continent. Rosukrenergo didn't produce gas, it simply moved it. By inserting himself into the trade, Mogilevich was able to siphon billions of dollars in fees, while exerting massive leverage over both governments. He controlled the valves of the pipelines. If political leaders didn't play ball with his network, the gas could simply stop flowing. This move made Mogilevich effectively untouchable. He had created a situation where his personal freedom was linked to international energy security. Western intelligence agencies knew exactly who he was, but arresting him risked a diplomatic crisis that could leave millions of Europeans without heat in the dead of winter. As one former FBI official put it, he didn't just have a seat at the table, he owned the table, the chairs, and the fuel that cooked the food. The Invisible Emperor. Today, despite a $5 million FBI bounty and a permanent spot on the most wanted list, Mogilevich lives openly in Moscow. He is protected by the highest levels of the Russian state, a man who knows too many secrets and controls too much money to ever be handed over to a Western court. He has proven that with a degree in economics and a lack of a soul, a boy from Kiev can grow up to become an invisible emperor who holds the world's thermostat in his hand. In 2008, the world thought the Brainy Don had finally fallen. Mogilevich was arrested in Moscow on charges of tax evasion involving a cosmetics chain. However, the theater of justice was short-lived. Just 18 months later, he walked out of prison a free man. The Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs dropped all charges, citing a lack of evidence, a move widely seen by international observers as a clear signal of his state-sponsored immunity. Former FSB officers, including Alexander Litvinenko, the man poisoned by polonium-210 in 2006, claimed that Mogilevich is far more than a gangster. He is an informal asset of the state. He handles the dark work that sovereign governments cannot officially touch. Sanction busting, using his global shell companies to move restricted goods and capital. Political influence, funneling black cash to foreign political parties to destabilize rivals. Cyber infrastructure, providing the logistical backbone for state-aligned hacking collectives. Today, Mogilevich lives a life of quiet luxury in Moscow, often spotted in high-end restaurants or at his sprawling estate. While the FBI maintains a $5 million bounty and a permanent spot for him on the 10 most wanted list, the Russian constitution prohibits the extradition of its citizens. He is a living ghost, a man whose influence is felt in every major financial capital, yet who remains physically out of reach. Semion Mogilevich proved his initial thesis, that systems are meant to be manipulated. By weaving his criminal federation into the fabric of a nuclear-armed state, he achieved the ultimate market stability. He didn't just survive the collapse of the Soviet Union, he became one of its most essential, if invisible, architects. He remains the only man in history to be wanted by every major intelligence agency while simultaneously being protected by one of the most powerful. In 2015, the FBI took a step that sent shockwaves through the global law enforcement community. They removed Semion Mogilevich from the 10 most wanted list. For nearly a decade, his face had sat alongside terrorists and mass murderers. His removal wasn't a sign of his innocence, nor was it because he had been captured. It was a public admission of defeat. The Bureau concluded that as long as Mogilevich remained on Russian soil, he was effectively beyond the reach of Western law. The United States and Russia have no extradition treaty. Mogilevich, living under the protection of a nuclear-armed state, had successfully utilized the ultimate market gap, the space between international law and sovereign protection. The FBI stated that the Brainy Don no longer met the criteria for the list because the likelihood of his capture had dropped to zero. He had achieved the impossible. He had outlasted the hunt. He has a wealth of resources. He's very smart. And he's very well connected, an FBI official noted. We've done everything we can, and he's still there. Mogilevich's story is the blueprint for the 21st century criminal. He proved that an economics degree is more powerful than a machine gun, and that a network of shell companies is more resilient than a fortress. By weaving his criminal interests into the national security and energy interests of a superpower, he made himself a part of the global infrastructure. Today, Mogilevich remains a free man. He is a multi-billionaire who beat the system by becoming a pillar of it. While other gangsters died in prison or in the streets, the Brainy Don proved his original theory. If you understand how systems fail, you can build an empire in the ruins. In the war between the FBI and the Economist won. Mogilevich's true legacy is the modern narco-state. He showed a generation of criminals how to hide behind shell companies, how to buy politicians with energy deals, and how to make themselves essential to the global economy. Today's ransomware attacks and state-sponsored hacking are all chapters from the playbook written by the man in Moscow who is still dabbing his cigarette. Semion Mogilevich was never chased into a corner. He was never dragged into court. He was never made to answer a single question under oath. In a world where most crime stories end with handcuffs or a body, his ends with a calculation. The FBI didn't defeat him. It recalculated the odds and walked away. Mogilevich understood something earlier than anyone else. Power in the modern age doesn't come from violence, but from necessity. You can arrest a man with a gun. You can kill a kingpin with an army. But you cannot easily touch someone who controls capital flows, energy pipelines, and state interests without destabilizing entire regions. He didn't corrupt the system from the outside. He rewired it from within. Banks became laundromats. Corporations became camouflage. Governments became partners of convenience. And law enforcement, bound by borders and treaties, became irrelevant. Today, Mogilevich lives openly, untouchable, not because he is hidden, but because he is embedded. His legacy isn't measured in bodies or prison sentences. It's measured in blueprints. Every narco-state, every ransomware empire, every crime syndicate that looks more like a corporation than a gang is following the path he mapped. The Brainy Don didn't run from justice. He made justice incompatible with arrest. And in doing so, he proved the most unsettling truth of all. In the 21st century, the most dangerous criminals don't break the law. They make themselves too essential for the law to enforce.